The air that evening smelled of rosemary and dusted sugar glaze. Golden light slid through the lace curtains, touching the silver on my dining table, the same one I'd polished every Sunday for almost 50 years. The roast shimmered under its thin layer of heat. Outside, the Oregon sky had begun to turn the color of apricots. Inside, I could hear only the faint ticking of my porcelain clock, that soft, steady rhythm I used to find comforting. I never imagined that clock would one day count down the moment my family stopped seeing me as a person. That Sunday was the first time silence tasted like betrayal. It sounded like laughter that didn't include me. Thomas was carving his slice when he said it. Mom's pension would be more useful in the right hands, he joked, eyes glinting toward Claire. She laughed that brittle, bright laugh people use when they think cruelty is wit. Ethan looked down at his plate, stirring the gravy into circles. No one else said a word. I kept the carving knife moving, pretending I hadn't heard. The blade trembled against the roast. I felt heat climbing up my neck, a pulse that made my vision swim. Still I smiled, because that's what mothers do when their hearts begin to break. They smile so no one has to feel guilty for hurting them. For years I'd served these dinners as if they were small ceremonies of love. Roast beef, apple pie, mashed potatoes, all made from memory, not recipes. I used to tell Thomas when he was little, only special people get the crispy edges. He'd grin and reach for the plate like it was treasure. That night, he didn't even thank me. Claire poured herself more wine, said something about tight finances and how helpful Mom's contribution is. Her words slid across the table like oil on water. Nobody looked at me, just at their glasses, at the gravy boat, anywhere but my eyes. The room felt smaller then. Too much heat, too much air heavy with the scent of meat and unsaid things. I looked at Ethan, sweet boy, nearly grown now, and saw how shame stiffened his shoulders. He loved me once, I thought. He still might. But children learn from the air they breathe, and that air had already turned cold. Eat, everyone, I said softly. My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to the clock. It kept ticking louder than forks, louder than my heartbeat. Each second told me something I didn't want to know. That love can curdle, that kindness can turn into currency, that silence remembers everything you try to bury. After dinner, I cleared the plates alone. Thomas turned on the game. Claire scrolled through her phone. No one offered to help. I stacked the dishes one by one under the yellow kitchen light, porcelain against porcelain, the same sound my clock would make later when it cracked. In the quiet, I found myself whispering to that clock. It had been a gift from my husband, George. He bought it on our 10th anniversary, saying, "Time doesn't stop, Maggie, but we can fill it with something good." He used to wind it every Sunday before dinner. After he passed, I kept winding it myself, as if the motion could keep him near. Now its face reflected a different family, my own flesh and blood, turning me into a line item on their budget. I tried to swallow the ache, but it stayed sharp as glass. When Thomas walked by me later, he patted my shoulder like you'd pat an old pet. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "We'll take good care of you." Take care. That's what people say when they mean take control. I smiled again, thin and tired, but inside something shifted, a hairline fracture in the stillness, like the clock's porcelain surface under too much pressure. That night, after they went to bed, I sat in the dark living room. The smell of dinner still hung in the air, sweet, sour, lonely. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. I could see my reflection in the glass, small, bent, fading around the edges. Behind me, the clock ticked, marking every second I'd spent pretending this was love. I thought about the years, about working double shifts with George to build a home, about raising Thomas when we had nothing but each other, about the pink dress I sewed for Claire when she married him, how proud I was, how certain she'd be kind to him and to me. Only special people, I used to say. Only special people deserve that kind of care. Now that phrase burned, because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being special. I had become necessary. And there's a world of difference between being loved and being needed. When I went to my room, I turned the clock toward the wall. I couldn't stand to see its face anymore, but even hidden, it wouldn't stop speaking. Tick after tick after tick, each one saying enough. Enough pretending, enough giving, enough waiting for someone else to remember I'm still alive. In the silence between ticks, I asked myself, when did love become an invoice? When did my life become a balance sheet for their comfort? No answer came, only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft settling of the house that was never really mine. I lay down and closed my eyes. The heat from the day lingered on my skin, not the warmth of family, but the heat of humiliation. I thought of George again, his hands rough from work, his eyes gentle. He would have said Maggie's silence is still a kind of voice. And maybe it was. Maybe the silence that night was the first word of a new story, one I hadn't dared to tell yet. The next morning I'd wake up the same woman. But something in me would have changed forever. A seed of defiance buried deep under years of obedience. I didn't know it yet, but that seed would grow roots before the week was over. Because even silence remembers. And as the house fell asleep around me, the porcelain clock kept ticking in the dark. Steady, merciless, alive. The clock kept ticking. But something inside me stopped. The day I moved in smelled like rain and cardboard tape. Thomas carried the last box through a doorway that still wore painter's dust, and the hall echoed with that hollow new house sound. Fresh caulk, wet wood, a hint of lemon oil, and heat from bodies trying to be helpful. Claire arranged tulips near the window. Their pink faces watched me like curious strangers. My porcelain clock rode in my lap the whole drive, warm against my dress, warm against my ribs. George used to say, "Time never lies." I set the clock on the mantel, wound it once, and listened. Between the ticks I heard a vow I didn't make. I was safe here, for now. The first nights were soft as wool. Claire filled a glass with water and set it by my bed the way I used to do for Thomas when he had fevers. He touched my shoulder, careful and proud like a good son trying to do right. "Mom, you shouldn't live alone," he said, voice low. I nodded because loneliness is a kind of winter, and I had already buried one husband and one house. The cottage keys felt heavy in my purse like teeth I'd pulled from my own mouth. I slept lightly, listening to pipes settle and paint dry and the clock keeping watch in the new dark. We sold the cottage within a month. I signed where they pointed, breathed where they forgot I still needed air, then walked the rooms one last time. There was the kitchen where George burned pancakes. There was the corner where I hemmed the pink dress for Claire's wedding. I locked the door, pressed the key into Thomas's palm, and told myself endings are just another kind of beginning. At the bank they said modern words about transfers and funds. My hands shook only once. Put some toward the renovations I offered, feeling noble, useful, necessary. Thomas squeezed my fingers. "We'll make the perfect place for you." I wanted to believe the promise more than the words. For a while the house played along. Afternoons smelled like cinnamon, and Claire's laugh sounded clean, almost musical. We bought matching mugs, mine with little blue violets that chipped in the sink. I cooked Sunday suppers. They told me to sit, and I sat like a queen whose crown was a good apron. When the first bill came, Thomas sighed and fanned the pages the way men do when admitting worry costs pride. "Mom, these utilities. I'll help a bit," I said. "Only until you're settled." I said it once. Silence said it again. By winter, my pension had learned a new name: household funds. Silence remembers especially the parts we never say out loud. The clock became background. Not to me, never to me, I heard every breath that little engine took. But on the mantel, surrounded by framed smiles, it turned invisible to everyone else. Claire moved the tulips aside and placed a scented candle near it, as if light could replace the past. Dinner talk shifted from kindness to cost, then to numbers, the slow creep of hours swallowing mine. "Mom, you're a blessing," Claire said once, eyes bright with gratitude and calculation. I smiled because love teaches women to smile through heat that burns the throat. I told myself this was family, this was what we do. I told myself I was still special. There were gifts that year. A new sofa in a grown-up color, an air fryer that breathed garlic, and promise a television large enough to hold a football field. I bought new curtains with my part because I wanted the room to feel gentle. Thomas tucked my receipt into a folder and kissed the top of my head. "See, we're all pitching in," he said. I wanted to answer, "Yes, but some of us are pitching pieces of ourselves." Instead, I folded the tissue around the curtain rings and made tea. Only special people I used to whisper to the roast when my children were small. Only special people get the crispy edges. I watched my edges soften in their hands. On quiet afternoons, I would dust around the clock. My fingers knew every curve, every faint chip near the base, from that one move in our second year. The porcelain was cool, then warm, depending on where the sun decided to rest. I wound it with slow turns the way George taught me, then waited for the first clean tick. Time never lies. It doesn't rush, it doesn't bend to comfort. It just tells you patient as God and twice as certain. And what it told me slowly, gently, was that kindness had changed clothes. It wore invoices now. It asked for access, not stories. It asked for more. The day I noticed the shift, it was hardly a day at all, just a moment with too much heat. Claire stood by the fridge with a grocery list, tapping the pen against her teeth. "Mom, could you move your deposit date?" It helps when things hit together. Her voice stayed sweet, but sweetness can weigh more than stones. I felt my spine hum as if the clock had moved inside my body. "Of course," I said. Then I washed the same plate twice. I told myself I was being dramatic. Then I told myself to stop telling myself anything at all. Silence remembers. It racks up its own little sums in the dark. At night, I dreamed of the cottage, wind in the willow by the back fence, that soft hush that forgave everything. George at the sink, hands wet, turning to kiss my temple. The pink dress hanging in the doorway silk, catching sun like a shy secret. I woke with my cheeks damp, and the clock ticking a sympathy I didn't want. Would you have done the same? Would you have traded a house of memories for a room where your name felt borrowed? If you felt this kind of silence, tell me below. Sometimes sharing a wound divides its weight. Sometimes it teaches you where to place your feet. I am not angry in these memories. Not yet. What I feel most is a strange, careful balance between gratitude and loss. Gratitude for the roof, the laughter, the tulips that tried to like me. Loss for the woman I had been in a house that fit my breath. Time never lies. It kept showing me the ledger under the lace, the cost beneath the kindness. I kept choosing to believe in the lace. Because mothers are trained to turn bills into blessings, to call sacrifice another name for love. But love without room becomes a chain. And a chain can shine too, if you polish it daily. I think the truth arrived on a Wednesday. Light rain, damp coats Ethan's backpack thumping the wall by the door. Claire tucked a bill under a magnet, then another and another, a paper garden blooming on cold metal. "Mom, we'll just keep your pension with the household account," Thomas said, casual as weather. He didn't wait for yes. He walked away like he already owned the answer. I stood very still, felt heat gather at my throat, then my shoulders, then my jaw. Enough something whispered quiet as the second hand. Not a shout, a seed. That's the night I moved the clock an inch to the left. No one noticed, and somehow that helped. I set a cup beside it, a little blue one I'd saved from the cottage, as if the clock might want company. Then I sat on the sofa and folded my hands the way churchwomen fold them when their prayers have changed. Share this if you believe silence deserves a voice. Not because I want noise, but because I want truth. Time never lies. It had been patient with me. It was time I returned the favor with my eyes open. In the end, it wasn't betrayal that hurt the most. It was how naturally kindness turned into custody and how quickly gratitude learned to count. The house still smelled like lemon oil and cinnamon on good days. The tulips still opened when the sun remembered us. I still baked on Sundays, sang to the roast, and saved the crispy edges for whoever asked first. But when I dusted the mantel, my fingers always paused on porcelain. The clock still shined, but its hands pointed only one way, theirs. Mornings used to greet me. Now they arrive unannounced, slipping through the blinds like trespassers. The house wakes in fragments, a cupboard closing water running the low hum of Claire's blender. My footsteps sound too loud on the tile, though no one ever says it. The kitchen smells of burnt toast and hurry. I pour my coffee into the same cup I used to share with George, the rim faintly chipped where his ring once tapped. Somehow everything that's cracked seems to belong to me now. Silence sits beside me at the table, faithful, unblinking. I used to be the first one they listen to. Now I'm the one they speak over. When I offer a suggestion about groceries, bills, anything, Thomas just nods absently, eyes still fixed on his phone. "Our expenses are getting tight," he said once, never meeting my gaze. Our expenses. The word snagged in my chest like a thorn. Because I'd already learned what our meant in this house mine included, theirs consumed. "Maybe we should cut back on takeout," I murmured. Claire sighed, that long, sharp exhale that slices air like paper. "We're managing, Mom," she said. "Just relax. Relax. The way you do when your existence feels like an intrusion." My meals began to shrink, though not from appetite. I learned to take the smallest plate, the corner chair, the pause before speaking. You can make yourself disappear one polite gesture at a time. The house helps. The walls here are generous with their silence. They swallow everything: my voice, my laughter, my right to matter. I started walking slower, as if the air itself preferred I move quietly. Even the clock, my porcelain companion, began to fade from sight. One evening I found it gone from the living room. Claire had moved it to my small side room to make space for new decor. It sat there against beige wallpaper, its tick a heartbeat no one wanted to hear. The days folded into each other like unwashed sheets. I watched the life of that house pass by my doorway. The flash of Claire's perfume, the thud of Ethan's sneakers, Thomas's voice on the phone, confident, impatient, belonging everywhere I no longer fit. When I stepped into the kitchen, conversation stopped. When I stepped out, laughter returned. The first time I noticed, I told myself I imagined it. The second time, I stopped telling myself anything at all. Would you have done the same? Would you have pretended not to notice your own erasure just to stay needed? Afternoons were the hardest. That's when loneliness turns physical. It presses down on the lungs, heavy and warm like a second skin. I'd sit by the window where the light softened near dusk, knitting nothing in particular, just loops of thought. I tried humming once an old lullaby George used to like. Claire appeared in the doorway, eyebrows arched. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Just a song." She smiled tightly. "Maybe wear headphones next time I'm on a call." Her heels clicked away, neat and final. I swallowed the rest of the tune. Silence remembers every note we never finish. Even the clock seemed to change. Its tick lost confidence, hesitating between seconds, like it was afraid of being overheard. Sometimes I caught myself whispering to it little things. Not confessions, just reminders that I existed. "I'm still here," I'd say. "You and me, we still count time." The sound of my voice in that small room startled me. It was older than I remembered, thinner, but still alive. Maybe that's all survival, is a voice refusing to vanish. One night, the truth arrived by accident. I was passing the hallway when I heard Claire's voice, low, amused the way people talk when they forget they're cruel. "She's lucky we keep her here," she said. Laughter followed. Not loud, not evil, just ordinary. That's what broke me, how casual it sounded, like weather talk. Lucky. I stood there barefoot, the carpet cold beneath my toes. The air burned, the house held its breath. They were in the kitchen, maybe sharing wine, maybe celebrating something. I didn't want to know. I turned away before the heat in my throat could turn into tears. Heat. That's what courage feels like at the start, a small, steady burn that refuses to die out. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words kept replaying, "Lucky we keep her here." Like I was a stray they fed out of guilt. I lay in bed, hands over my chest, feeling the tick of the clock echo my pulse. For the first time in years, I didn't pray for them. I prayed for clarity, for whatever strength it takes to see people as they are, not as you hope they'll be. If you've ever felt this kind of silence, tell me below. Maybe our quiet stories belong somewhere too. The next morning, Claire acted normal. Offered me coffee, asked about my sleep, complimented my cardigan. I answered politely, almost smiling, because sometimes politeness is a weapon, sharp, invisible, effective. I sat at the table, stirred the sugar, and listened to the ticking from the next room. Time never lies. It was telling me something again, but this time I was ready to hear it. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but I knew this, the house I built with love, had turned into a place where I was a guest, tolerated, not cherished. And the cruelest part, it was my own hands that packed the boxes, signed the papers, and walked through that door. How do you vanish in a house you built? Maybe by letting them believe they've done you a kindness. Maybe by waiting, watching until the silence finally answers back. When the sun dipped that evening, the last light fell across the mantel in my room. The porcelain clock gleamed faintly, like it still remembered touch. I brushed my fingers over its cracked face and smiled, small, secret knowing. I started whispering to the clock again. It didn't interrupt, didn't sigh, didn't ask for anything. It just listened. And in that moment I realized it was the only thing that still did. At night the house talks, not in words, but in the small aching noises of things pretending to rest. Pipes breathe, floors sigh, and somewhere behind the drywall, an argument starts again. It begins as a murmur, then builds into shapes I know too well. My name. Always my name. It slips through the walls like smoke curling under the door, soft but heavy. I pull the blanket higher, but sound has no mercy. It finds you even in prayer. The air smells of reheated food and worry. Silence waits beside me, patient remembering. Tonight, it remembers everything. Money. It's always money now. They think I can't hear, but old houses carry every word like a confession. She still gets her pension, Claire says, sharp, tired. We can't keep covering everything. Thomas answers, it's family money now. She knows that. No, I don't. Not the way they mean it. The word family used to warm me. Now it sounds like a key turning from the outside. I stare at the ceiling, tracing the faint light of the street lamp through the blinds. Once this used to be my home. Now it's just a place where my footsteps echo back without belonging. Ethan doesn't come by anymore. He used to stop in with his homework site cross-legged on the carpet while I checked his spelling. Now his footsteps stop at the hallway. A pause. A whisper. Then retreat. It's strange how children sense the temperature of a room before anyone says a word. The heat is gone here. All that's left is politeness, the cold kind. The kind that thanks you for dinner and forgets your name in the same breath. At breakfast, I hear my pension mentioned again, not as mine, but as arithmetic. Claire reads from a spreadsheet, her nails tapping against the screen. Groceries, utilities. Mom's deposit. She says it like inventory. Thomas nods, distracted, already thinking of something else. No one looks up. No one says, "How are you?" or "What would you like for breakfast?" The sound of the toaster fills the space where love should be. When I stand, the chair leg scrapes the tile, the loudest sound in the room. I whisper an apology. No one hears. Silence remembers it for me. That night I dream of George again. He's sitting by the sea in his flannel coat, the one with the missing button. The sky behind him is pale, endless. He looks younger the way he did when time was still kind. "You still have time, Maggie," he says. Just that. No advice, no anger, only trust. When I wake, I can still feel the warmth of his hand and the ticking. The porcelain clock beside my bed ticks unevenly now like a heartbeat limping towards something inevitable. Tick, pause, tick, skip. Every sound carries weight like the seconds themselves are grieving. Would you have done the same? Would you have stayed just to keep a roof, even if it wasn't really yours? If you've ever listened to the sound of your name being argued over, tell me below, because that kind of pain is too familiar to stay unnamed. The next morning, I decide to look at my bank statements, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. I used to balance ledgers for George's business. Numbers always told the truth faster than people did. The screen glows pale against the dim room. I scroll slow, deliberate. And then I see it. Withdrawals. Small at first, then larger, regular. Each one labeled transfer family expenses. My breath stops halfway through. Thomas! It has his digital signature. The son I trusted with my future had quietly rewritten it in his own favor. I don't cry. There's a kind of silence that comes after betrayal, not empty but sharp, like glass dust in the lungs. It doesn't hurt all at once. It settles, then cuts from the inside. I close the laptop slowly, carefully, as if gentleness could undo what I've seen. The tick of the clock grows louder, mocking. I touch its cracked porcelain surface, warm from the lamplight, and I swear it stutters under my fingers, as if even time was holding its breath for me. That evening they argue again. Different day, same rhythm. My name appears like punctuation. "She's been quiet lately," Claire says. Thomas answers, "Good. Less stress that way." Good. Less stress. They speak like I'm medicine that finally stopped reacting. I sit in my room listening to their words sink through drywall and disappointment. Every syllable lands somewhere deep, each one a nail in the life I used to know. And still part of me wants to protect them. The habit of love is hard to break. When the voices fade, I stay awake. No TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the broken rhythm of my clock. The house holds the echo of everything said within it. That's the thing about walls they don't forgive. They just absorb. Silence remembers, even what you wish it didn't. Later, I sit by the window and let the moonlight spill across my lap. It paints my hands and silver softens. The lines makes me almost whole again. Somewhere in the dark, a decision begins to take shape. It doesn't roar. It doesn't shout. It whispers one word. Enough. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. Because even the quietest hearts know when they've had their fill. I look toward the clock, its face half hidden in shadow. Each uneven tick feels heavier than the last, stretching the seconds into warnings. Time doesn't lie. It tells you when something's ending even before you admit it to yourself. The sound fills the room steady, relentless, and for the first time I understand what it's been saying all along. The tick became a countdown. The morning the letter came, the house was unusually still. No radio, no clinking dishes, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the porcelain clock. Light fell across the kitchen table, like a blade cutting through the dust. A plain white envelope waited beside the sugar jar, my name typed too neatly to be friendly. It smelled faintly of paper and truth. I remember sitting down, fingers trembling a little, the air thick with that strange heat that comes before a storm. I tore it open, slow, careful, as if gentleness could change what was inside. By the time I finished reading, I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. Some silences don't last. They detonate. It was from the bank. Numbers that didn't belong to me anymore. Withdrawals I hadn't made, signatures that weren't mine. All tidy, all official. At the bottom, one polite sentence, "Please confirm these family transactions." Family transactions. Such a soft phrase for such a cruel thing. I read it again and again until the ink blurred. George used to say paper tells the truth when people won't. He was right. The paper was louder than the house had been in months. When Thomas came home that evening, the smell of rain followed him inside. He shook his coat, smiled like nothing in the world was wrong. I waited until he sat down, then slid the letter across the table. "Can you explain this?" I asked quietly. He didn't even flinch. "Oh, that. It's just a family adjustment," he said, calm, measured, rehearsed. Family adjustment. The way he said it, smooth, efficient, made me colder than the rain outside. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my son was still the boy who used to bring me daisies from the backyard, their stems sticky with sap. But his eyes didn't meet mine. They stayed on the clock behind me like he couldn't stand the reflection. My voice shook when I said, "You took my money." He exhaled through his nose. "I used it to cover bills. It's all the same in the end, Mom." But it wasn't. Because somewhere between the word mom and bills, I stopped being his mother. I became the resource that kept the lights on. Later that night, I looked for the deed. I don't even know why, maybe hope, maybe punishment. The folder was in his office drawer, tucked behind a stack of property tax forms. I unfolded it carefully, tracing each line. There it was. Thomas's name. Only his. Mine gone. Not shared, not forgotten, but erased. I stood there for a long time, the heat climbing up my chest, until my ears rang. Enough. The word came soft, then louder, then steady. Enough pretending this was kindness. Enough silence mistaken for peace. Enough. I turned to leave and caught the edge of the table. The porcelain clock slipped from my hands. Time froze for one cruel second before it hit the floor. The sound was sharp, final. A small crack split its surface, spidering across the white like lightning across a pale sky. I stared at it, half expecting George to walk in and fix it. But he was gone, and so was the woman who used to wait for someone else to protect her. Would you have done the same? Would you have looked your child in the eye and asked why? Or would you have smiled as mothers do and carried the wound quietly? If you've ever trusted too deeply, tell me below. Because silence can't heal what it hides. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and something almost metallic, like fear. The walls seemed closer, the house smaller. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that time was still moving, even if I wasn't. I kept thinking about the way Thomas said, family adjustment. How easily the words left his mouth, as if morality were just another number on a spreadsheet. There's a particular ache when betrayal comes from someone whose heartbeat once rested against yours. You can't hate them. You can only mourn the person they were before they learned how to lie. In the early hours, I walked into the kitchen. The floor was cold, the tile biting at my feet. I picked up the cracked clock from the corner, tracing the fracture with my thumb. The damage was small but permanent like trust after it's been touched by greed. "Time never lies," George used to whisper. He was right. Time had been telling me for months. I'd just stopped listening. By dawn, I had folded the letter, the bank notice, and the deed into a neat pile. Proof of what I'd lost and what I was about to take back. Through the window, I could see the faint shimmer of morning light breaking over the yard. The world didn't look different, but I was. I had opened a letter and found my truth inside it. When your child steals your peace, where do you run? Maybe you don't. Maybe you stand still until the silence gives you back your voice. The porcelain clock sat on the table, the crack catching the light like a scar. I wound it once, slow and deliberate, letting it tick again. Steady, defiant, alive, because that's what I was too cracked but still ticking. The clock cracked, and so did my silence. The sound came first, a voice muffled through the half-closed door. Claire's voice, sharp, brittle, each word soaked in irritation. "It's like keeping an old tenant," she said. "She doesn't even pay enough to make it worth it." I froze halfway down the hallway, the morning light trembling across the floorboards. My own breath felt like a trespass. Her laughter followed, small, cruel, private. For a moment I didn't recognize it, not because of how it sounded, but because it came from someone who shared my table, my air, my history. The air in the house turned thick, humid, heavy. Heat rose behind my eyes, slow and certain. And for the first time, I realized I was no longer a mother in my own home. I was a burden with a heartbeat. It burned not just what she said, but how easily it left her mouth. Like I wasn't in the next room, like my years, my love, my sacrifices had all become background noise. I thought of Thomas, of those years I raised him alone while George worked double shifts, nights when the house echoed with colic and exhaustion when dinner was bread and prayer. And Claire? She came later, polished, perfect, ready to claim what she never helped build. The irony of it all stung like salt in a wound. How quickly the world forgets the hands that held it up. Ethan walked in as I was folding laundry, his small fingers tugging at my sleeve. "Grandma, are you okay?" His eyes so open, so unaware of what kind of house he was growing up in. I smiled. "I'm just tired, sweetheart." He nodded, trusting me the way only children do. And I envied that the luxury of believing everything will be all right, because someone older says so. Silence remembers every lie we tell to protect innocence. The days blurred after that. Meals tasted of politeness, not flavor. Claire's perfume lingered longer than her words, sweet and artificial. Thomas avoided eye contact. Guilt is a coward's shadow. I began waking before sunrise, slipping out while the house still slept. The cold air met me like an old friend bracing honest clean. The streets were empty, the kind of quiet where even your thoughts sound loud. I walked without direction, just to hear my shoes against the pavement. That sound, my own rhythm unmonitored, felt like proof that I still existed. Sometimes the heat of anger is the only warmth you have left. Would you have stayed after hearing those words? Would you have swallowed them down the way mothers are taught to do? If you've ever hidden your pain behind a quiet smile, tell me below. Because some hurts live longer when they're buried. It was on one of those early walks that I met her. Nora, a retired librarian with silver hair tied in a loose braid and eyes like calm water. She sat on a bench outside the bakery holding a book and a cup of tea. "Lovely morning," she said, her voice soft but sure. I nodded, hesitant. We spoke about small things at first, the weather, the stray cats, the smell of bread. Her words carried no judgment, no agenda, just space. Do you know how rare that is, to be heard without being managed? Day after day, I found myself walking farther, finding her again, always in that same spot. She started bringing an extra cup of tea. Chamomile for her, Earl Grey for me. It was nothing grand, no dramatic friendship, just gentle consistency. But in that steadiness, something inside me began to shift. I'd forgotten what kindness felt like when it didn't come with conditions. One morning, as we sat under a pale pink sky, she looked at me quietly and said, "You carry something heavy. You don't have to tell me what it is." The simplicity of it undid me. Tears came, not loud, not messy, just quiet proof that I still could. I didn't tell her everything, only that my house had grown smaller and my world colder. She listened, truly listened. When I finished, she said, "People mistake survival for peace. But peace doesn't come from staying still. Her words hung in the air, soft and firm. I let them sink in. Silence remembers, I thought, but maybe kindness does too. That day the walk home felt different. The sun was higher, the air warmer. Even the pavement seemed to hold me more gently. I passed by gardens blooming wild and untrimmed, nature's way of saying, life finds a way. And for the first time I didn't dread the sight of my front door, because I knew peace might live somewhere beyond it. That evening Claire asked where I'd been. Her tone was casual, her eyes curious or perhaps suspicious. Out walking, I said. She smiled faintly. At your age? At my age, I answered, matching her gaze. Something unspoken passed between us. Not victory, not defiance, just truth. She looked away first. Later I sat by the window with my tea, watching the last light fade over the street. The house hummed its usual sounds, the fridge, the clock, the distant television. But they no longer owned my silence, because outside, somewhere between Nora's gentle voice and the open sky, I'd remembered myself. What if kindness was waiting outside the house that trapped you? What if the door was never locked, only feared? Share this if you believe silence deserves a voice. The next morning I left earlier than usual. The air was cool, the world unjudging. I walked past the bakery, past the park, past the weight of yesterday. The wind brushed my face like a benediction, and I breathed. For the first time in years, I walked without permission. The morning began with light spilling across the kitchen table, soft, deliberate, almost tender. It touched the porcelain clock first, the same one I'd carried through every move, every heartbreak. Its face gleamed pale gold in the early light, a reminder that even fragile things can still reflect beauty. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper, the scent of decision. I sat there, my teacup cooling beside a small stack of forms Nora had helped me print. The world outside was waking. But for me, something else was stirring, something steadier, quieter. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for permission, not for kindness. Freedom, I realized, might start with something as simple as a pen. Nora had been the one to plant the seed. We met again at the library, her hands full of books and quiet wisdom. She spoke in that calm way of hers, as if every word had been tested by time. There are laws that protect seniors. Maggie, she said softly, rights they don't want you to remember. We spent hours in the corner reading about pensions, guardianships, autonomy. The words felt like light after years of dimness. I'd forgotten what power looked like when written in ink. A few days later, I took the bus into town, my heart steady, my face neutral. The bank smelled of air conditioning and caution. I waited my turn, pretending to study the posters about savings plans. When my name was called, I walked to the counter like a woman running out of years to waste. I'd like to redirect my pension to a new account, I said. The clerk smiled, polite but detached. Of course, ma'am. Do you have identification? I handed over my ID. My hand didn't shake. Only my silence did, remembering all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. Would you have done the same? Would you have rewritten your life with one small stroke of ink? If you've ever hidden your courage behind patience, tell me below. Because sometimes waiting is just another word for forgetting yourself. When I left the bank, the sun hit my face warm, bright, and almost forgiving. The city noises were sharp. Alive cars, pigeons, laughter, living proof that the world kept moving. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving too. I stopped by a cafe near the corner, ordered tea, and let myself breathe. Nora had given me a small notebook for important things, she said. Inside, I'd written one sentence that morning. You still have time, Maggie. George's words. They came back like a promise finally answered. Later that week, Nora told me about a program for affordable senior housing. Quiet apartments near the river, modest but independent. My own space, my own key. Just imagining it filled my chest with a gentle ache. I'd been invisible for so long I'd almost forgotten what choice tasted like. Freedom didn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispered from a brochure printed on recycled paper. Back home, I began to prepare. Not openly subtle, deliberate the way one folds away grief. I sorted drawers, packed slowly, kept only what mattered. Among the clutter of decades, I found the pink dress, the one I'd sewn for Claire when she was a child. Tiny stitches, uneven, but full of hope. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. I pressed it against my heart, remembering the warmth before the distance. Only special people, George used to say when I doubted myself. For years I'd forgotten he meant me. That evening, I polished the porcelain clock, slow circles, soft cloth, quiet ritual. Its crack caught the light, delicate and permanent. Then I wrapped it carefully, placed it in a small box, not as a farewell, but as a promise. One day I'd set it on a new table in a place where silence didn't bruise. It didn't take long for Thomas to notice. He came into my room that night, his face calm but his eyes searching. "Mom," he said, "there's been some unusual activity in your bank account. Everything okay?" I smiled, faint but steady. "Oh, I must have clicked something wrong. These online things confuse me." He hesitated, the first crack in his confidence I'd seen in months. Then he nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. Let me know if you need help." "I will," I said, but we both knew I wouldn't. After he left, I sat in the dim glow of the lamp, listening to the steady tick of the clock. Each sound felt different now, not like a countdown, but a metronome for new rhythm. I whispered into the quiet silence remembers, and now so do I. The words settled in the air like prayer. The next morning I called Nora. Her voice was warm, alert. "So did you do it?" she asked. "Yes," I said, exhaling the truth. "It's done." She paused, then laughed softly. "Then the rest will follow." Her faith in me was the kind of heat that thawed the coldest corners of my life. For years I'd been spoken over, managed, dismissed. Now, with one signature, I'd started speaking again, not loudly, but clearly. Freedom doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet shift in the air, the weight lifting from your ribs when you realize no one owns your time. Can freedom start with one signature? Yes. But it grows each time you choose not to explain yourself after. When night came, I placed the packed box by the door, the clock, the dress, the notebook, a photograph of George smiling by the sea. I didn't know exactly when I'd leave, only that I would. Outside, dawn began to stretch its pale fingers across the window pane. Light returned to the same table where I'd begun this plan, washing everything in soft gold once again. The air was still. The clock ticked steady. My breath felt lighter. The hands of the clock pointed to dawn. The morning I left the house was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No footsteps, no coffee brewing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick, tick of the cracked porcelain clock. Light seeped through the curtains like a secret I was finally ready to tell. The air smelled of dust and lemon cleaner, sterile temporary, as if even the walls knew I was going. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the same room where I'd been ignored, dismissed, tolerated. Now it was only me, and the silence I'd earned. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives as the absence of noise. I packed slowly, one suitcase small enough for me to carry without help. A few clothes, the pink dress, my notebook, a photograph of George by the river, and the clock wrapped carefully in an old scarf. It still ticked uneven but steady, like an old heart refusing to give up. Each sound was a reminder time belongs to those who dare to move forward. I wrote the letter last. My handwriting shook, but my words did not. "You wanted my money more than my presence. So keep the house. I'm keeping my life." I left it on the kitchen table beside a half-empty jar of Jam Domestic Final True. Would you have done the same? Would you have walked away from the house you built, the people you once called home? If you've ever chosen peace over comfort, tell me below. Because silence remembers, but sometimes it forgives too. The bus stop sat at the edge of town beneath a sycamore tree older than any of us. I sat with my hands folded, the suitcase by my feet. The world felt bigger than I remembered. Crisp air, distant chatter, the smell of rain on pavement. Every sense felt sharpened, alive. I wasn't running away. I was walking towards something that had waited patiently for me to notice it. When the bus arrived, I climbed the steps slowly, breathing in the scent of engine oil and morning air. The driver, a kind-faced man in his 40s, nodded without question. I found a seat by the window, pressed my palm to the cool glass, and watched the reflection of the only life I'd known. For the first time, I saw it clearly, not as a home, but as a cage I had mistaken for love. The phone rang halfway down the highway. Nora handed it to me. Her eyes, steady and kind, told me she already knew. Thomas's voice came through, sharp and breathless. "Mom, what did you do? You can't just leave. This is..." "This is selfish." That word selfish struck like a match in a dark room. He'd used it once before long ago when George left for work one too many nights and missed Ethan's first school recital. Back then, Thomas cried. Now he shouted, and I realized he had become the echo of the man he'd judged. "I'm not being selfish," I said softly. "I'm being alive." He didn't answer. Only static filled the space between us, and for once, it didn't hurt. It was just silence. And silence, I've learned, is never empty. It's truth-breathing. By the time we reached Nora's neighborhood, the sky had turned a tender blue, the color of forgiveness. She lived in a small apartment above a flower shop. The scent of lilies and fresh soil met me at the door, warm living things growing without permission. She showed me the spare room. One bed, one window. Enough. That word again, but now it meant something new. Enough to rest, enough to begin, enough to belong to myself. We shared tea that evening, the clock ticking softly between us on the nightstand. Its sound no longer mocked me. It marked a new rhythm, steady, sure, alive. Nora smiled. "You look lighter," she said. I nodded. "Maybe I finally am." "Would you have waited this long to take your life back? Or would you have left the first time they made you feel small? Share this if you believe silence deserves a voice." A week passed before Thomas called again. This time his tone was different, brittle, uncertain. "The bills are stacking up," he said. "The mortgage, the repairs. We didn't realize how much you covered." His words trembled under their own weight. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But justice, I've learned, doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like absence, like a missing heartbeat they finally notice when the house gets too quiet. "Take care of yourself," I whispered. Then I hung up gently, like closing a door that had stayed open too long. That night, I sat by the window, the porcelain clock beside me still cracked but faithful. Outside, streetlights glowed against the mist, turning everything soft. For years, I had lived waiting for apologies, for warmth, for love that didn't measure my worth in currency. Now there was no waiting, only stillness, and peace that didn't ask for permission. Only special people, George used to say. I finally understood. He hadn't meant those who loved easily, but those who dared to choose themselves when no one else would. The dawn crept up quietly, pale light brushing against the curtains. The city stirred, a dog barked, a door opened somewhere below. The world was moving again, and this time I was part of it. I took one last look out the window. The road shimmered with the promise of distance. Why is it only when we disappear that they start to see us? Maybe because silence finally makes the truth too loud to ignore. The bus pulled away from the stop wheels, humming like a heartbeat. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. When the bus pulled away, I didn't look back. Mornings feel different now. The air moves softly through the curtains, brushing against my face like an old friend. Outside, the city hums in a language I'm learning to love again. Distant traffic footsteps, a bark or two, all stitched together by time. The sunlight lands gently on the table, where my breakfast waits a slice of toast, one boiled egg, and a cup of tea. Nothing special. But after years of walking on eggshells, peace tastes like luxury. The porcelain clock sits by the window, ticking steady and sure. Its crack catches the light, not as a flaw, but as proof it survived. I did too. Silence remembers. But now it feels kind. Living with Nora has been a quiet education. She never asks too much, never fills the room with noise. We share space the way people who've seen loss learn to, gently, without intrusion. Some mornings she hums while watering the plants. Some afternoons we sit in silence, both reading, both healed by the absence of expectation. She tells me peace isn't the lack of sound, Maggie. It's the presence of safety. And I think she's right. Safety isn't something you find. It's something you rebuild, piece by trembling piece, until it fits you again. I've started cooking for myself. Simple meals, soups, stews, things I used to make for everyone else. Now I make them for me. It's strange how different food tastes when no one's judging how much salt you used. The air fills with warmth, and for a moment I feel George beside me, smiling that quiet, approving smile. Only special people, he once said. I think he meant those who keep choosing kindness after being broken. Maybe I'm finally one of them. Sometimes when the sun sets, I paint. Nothing grand, just soft colors, shapes that remind me of places I miss. The sea, the old cottage, the pink dress. Ah, the pink dress. I painted it once, hanging alone on a clothesline, the wind tugging gently at its sleeve. It looked lonely but free, like me. Would you have done the same? Would you have walked away not to escape but to breathe, if you've ever had to leave in order to return to yourself? Tell me below. Because leaving isn't always running. Sometimes it's remembering who you were before the noise. A few weeks ago there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. I thought it might be Nora's neighbor again with her wandering cat. But when I opened it, I saw Ethan. My grandson, taller, older eyes full of something between guilt and hope. "Grandma," he said quietly, "I miss you. Just that. No rehearsed apology, no grown-up pretenses. Only truth, pure and trembling." I let him in. We sat by the window, the clock ticking gently between us. He told me about school, about Claire's new job, about how quiet the house felt now. I didn't know he whispered. I didn't understand how they made you feel. I smiled. "You weren't supposed to. You were just a child." He looked down, voice breaking. But I saw. I just didn't know what to do. I reached for his hand, warm, strong, unsure. "Do something different now," I said. He nodded, eyes glistening. We sat there in silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. For a moment I saw George's kindness flicker in him, a legacy that hadn't been lost after all. After Ethan left, I watched him from the window as he walked down the street. He turned once to wave. The light hit his face, and I could see it the boy he'd been, the man he was becoming. In that moment I forgave them all, not because they asked, but because forgiveness was no longer for them. It was for me. I went to the clock, wound it gently. Its steady rhythm filled the room like a second heartbeat. Tick, tock, peace. Time didn't erase what happened, it just softened the edges, made the pain less sharp, more bearable. I realized I didn't want to forget. I wanted to remember without bleeding. Silence remembers, yes, but silence also restores. Would you have forgiven them, even after the cracks, the loss, the loneliness? Share this. If you believe peace is its own kind of justice. Now each morning begins the same way: sunlight, tea, the smell of bread toasting. I walk to the window and watch the world move. Sometimes the bus passes the same one that carried me away months ago. I no longer feel the sting of leaving, only the calm of arrival. Everything I needed was waiting in the quiet I once feared. I've learned that love isn't always loud or loyal. Sometimes it's fragile, conditional, human. But still it exists. It survives the houses that failed it. It grows in unexpected soil watered by forgiveness and sunlight. Can love survive the house it was born in, maybe not unchanged, but it can learn to bloom elsewhere? The clock ticks softly beside me, its sound steady and true. Outside the day hums with ordinary grace. I breathe. I exist. And in this quiet, this gentle golden quiet, I am whole. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it quiets it. The day they came back, the air smelled of lilacs and rain. I had just finished setting 2 cups of tea on the table, chamomile their favorite. Outside, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, catching on the crack of the porcelain clock. It gleamed like a scar healed, but not forgotten. Time was steady now, mine again. When the knock came soft but rehearsed, I didn't rush. I let them wait long enough for the silence to settle in, because silence remembers. And this time it would speak for me. Thomas stood at the door, first hands in pockets, voice coated in concern. "Mom, he said you look well. We were worried." Behind him, Claire smiled, that brittle smile, the one that never reached her eyes. I smiled back, gentle but unshaken. "Come in. I just made tea." They stepped inside, glancing around the room. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The air carried a stillness that made them nervous. I could see it in the way Claire's eyes darted toward the clock, as if it might tell her something she didn't want to hear. We sat. The clock ticked softly between us, steady, deliberate. For years I had been the one filling silence with apologies, smoothing discomfort, hiding truth. Not today. Today I let silence be the 4th guest at the table. Thomas began with small talk, whether Ethan, the neighborhood. But then came the real reason. He leaned forward, voice lowering. "Mom, we noticed some changes in your bank activity again. We just want to make sure you're managing everything properly." Claire nodded, pretending sympathy. You know how tricky finances can be at your age. I looked at them both and smiled. Oh, I'm managing fine. In fact, better than ever. I reached for a small folder on the counter and laid it gently on the table. It made a soft sound like truth landing. Here, I said, sliding it toward them. You should see this. Inside was a copy of my latest bank statement, my pension deposits, my savings, my transfers. Every dollar accounted for. Every cent in my name. Their faces tightened just slightly. The kind of reaction people have when control slips quietly from their fingers. Every dollar now answers to me, I said calmly. The words tasted like peace and a little heat, the kind that doesn't burn but cleanses. Would you have spoken then? Would you have chosen quiet power over rage? If you've ever swallowed your truth to keep the peace, tell me below. Because sometimes silence doesn't hide surrender, it hides preparation. Thomas tried to smile, but it faltered. Mom, no one's questioning you. We're just trying to help, Claire added softly. It's just, we worry. You've made some impulsive choices before. Her tone was honeyed, but her eyes were sharp, the same eyes that once looked past me as if I were a burden. I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape softly against the floor. Impulsive. No, dear. Thoughtful. I walked to the window, the light warm against my face. You see, I've been thinking a lot about what people value money, control, appearances. I turned back to them. But the one thing I learned is this value means nothing to those who can't see worth. I took a deep breath, then spoke the truth I'd been holding close. I've rewritten my will. The room stilled, even the clock seemed to hold its breath. I've left everything to Ethan and the Silver Circle Foundation for seniors, those who listened when no one else did. Thomas blinked. Mom, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm quite serious, I said, my voice soft but steady. The house, the savings, everything you once called yours, it never was. Now it goes to those who understand what enough really means. The word enough hung in the air, heavy, final, liberating. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. For the first time, I didn't have to explain, justify, or beg to be seen. My silence had already spoken long before they arrived. It had built walls of truth around me, unshakable, gentle, just. Claire looked away first, pretending to sip her tea. Thomas's jaw tightened, pride wrestling with disbelief. I could almost see the boy he once was, the one who used to bring me flowers from the yard, not realizing they were weeds. He'd meant well then, but somewhere between wanting and taking, he'd forgotten what love sounds like when it isn't transactional. When they finally stood to leave, Thomas muttered, "You're making a mistake, Mom." I smiled. I've made plenty. This isn't one of them. He shook his head, anger dulling into something sadder. Claire reached for her purse, avoiding my eyes. At the door, Thomas turned once more. "Why are you doing this?" I paused. "To teach you value," I said softly. "Because you never saw mine." He didn't answer. He just nodded, maybe out of shame, maybe understanding. Either way, I didn't need to know. Peace doesn't depend on closure, only clarity. Would you have done it? Would you have faced those you love to reclaim yourself? Share this if you believe justice can be quiet. When the door closed, I stood in the stillness they left behind. The clock chimed noon, 1-2-3, steady and bright. Its cracked face caught the sunlight again, turning its flaw into a prism. The sound echoed through the small apartment, not loud, not demanding, just true. I poured the remaining tea into my cup and sat by the window. Outside, a breeze carried the scent of lilac once more. The world moved on gentle and unconcerned. And for the first time in years, so did I. How do you teach value to those who never saw yours? You stop trying. You let silence do it for you. They left with empty hands, and I with peace. The mornings at the center always smell of cinnamon and soap. Someone is baking bread in the kitchen, and somewhere down the hall an old radio hums a song from the 60s. The sound of laughter floats between the walls, thin, fragile, hopeful. It's a place stitched together by second chances. Nora and I come every Tuesday now. We pour coffee, fold donated clothes, and mostly listen. Because silence here has a different tone. It doesn't accuse or ache. It heals. And in that quiet, I see pieces of myself reflected back. The women who sit in these chairs, I know their eyes. I once had the same look, that waiting kind of pain. Today I teach them time. Because time, unlike people, never lies. I started bringing little gifts, small clock pendants on silver chains. Each one ticks softly like a secret heartbeat. When I fasten one around their necks, I tell them, time never lies. It remembers what you give it. Some smile through tears, some stare silent and trembling, but all of them understand. We measure survival not in days but in decisions. One woman, Anna, tells me her husband still controls her money. She hides coins in her shoe for bus fare. When she speaks, her voice shakes, but her eyes glow faintly, a pilot light refusing to die. I squeeze her hand. "You're stronger than you think," I whisper. And she whispers back, "I hope so. Hope is enough for now." Would you have stayed? Would you have waited for permission to live again? If you've ever had to rebuild your courage from whispers, tell me below, because every survivor starts with silence and ends with their own name. It was near closing when she walked in, Linda. She looked familiar, though her face carried the weight of someone who'd stopped looking at herself in mirrors. She said she was new in town, just visiting, and that she'd seen our flyer at the pharmacy. When I poured her tea, her hands trembled. "I know you," she said quietly. Her voice broke, then steadied. "You're Claire's mother-in-law." For a moment the air went still. Even the radio seemed to pause mid-chorus. I felt heat rise up my chest. Not anger, memory. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I was." She took a deep breath. "I'm her sister," she whispered. And then she cried. Not polite tears, but the kind that come from years of holding too much. She told me how Claire had always needed control, how their mother adored her but ignored the cruelty beneath the charm, how even as children Claire learned to take, never to give. "I tried to help her," Linda said, "but she used me too. I left home to survive her." Her words cracked something open in me. Not pain, not pity. Recognition. Cruelty travels through generations like a rumor that never dies. But so does courage, and maybe that's the real inheritance worth leaving behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock on my bedside table ticked steady in the dark, the same sound that once haunted me now, keeping me grounded. I thought of all the women who came through our door bruised in body, muted in spirit, trying to unlearn obedience. I used to believe survival was something private, a secret endurance you kept tucked inside. But it isn't. It's a chain reaction. One woman leaves, another follows. One speaks, another finds her voice. One forgives, another begins. Only special people, George used to say. I never understood what he meant. Now I do. Special people aren't born strong, they just refuse to stay broken. Even silence bends toward them, waiting to serve. Would you have forgiven someone like Claire? Or would you have passed the pain forward without meaning to? Share this if you believe freedom can be taught. Weeks later, Linda returned. She brought cookies, slightly burnt sweet, all the same. She laughed about it, called herself hopeless in the kitchen. I told her that imperfection is the proof of trying. We sat by the window, watching the snow fall in slow spirals. For once, the cold didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. As she left, she turned and said, "I think Claire was jealous of you. You survived what she couldn't face." Her words stayed with me long after the door closed. Maybe forgiveness isn't mercy. Maybe it's inheritance. Maybe each act of release rewrites a pattern that's been waiting too long to change. The next day, I ordered 10 more pendants, silver, small, timeless. When they arrived, I held one in my hand and whispered, "Time never lies." It felt warm against my palm, almost alive. Now every Tuesday, I give one away. To women who need a symbol, not a speech. To remind them that they're not late, not behind, not forgotten. Just on time for themselves. The ticking pendants catch the light, a choir of small redemptions. In their shimmer, I see the proof of everything I once thought I'd lost: faith, purpose, belonging. Can breaking free become a legacy? I believe it can. Because courage, like cruelty, leaves echoes. But only one of them heals. The center is quiet now. Evening hums through the windows, golden and soft. The clock by the door ticks steady, its sound like a gentle reminder. Time once stolen can be reclaimed. The house smells of rosemary and bread, the kind of smell that clings to memory, soft and forgiving. Sunlight filters through the lace curtains, landing in gentle squares across the table. Steam curls from a pot of soup, and laughter, real laughter, ripples through the room. It's been a year since that long, quiet departure, and tonight, for the first time, I'm hosting Sunday dinner again. Only this time, it isn't in my house. It's in Nora's smaller, warmer, filled with new voices and old peace. At the center of the table sits the porcelain clock. Repaired. The crack still faintly visible, like a scar that no longer hurts. Silence doesn't haunt here. It hums. Ethan is taller now, confident in ways that surprise me. He moves around the kitchen with an ease that reminds me of George Hand's steady laughter, low, always checking to see if everyone's plate is full. When our eyes meet, he grins. "Grandma, the soup's perfect this time." I smile back. That's because I stopped measuring and started trusting. He laughs, but I mean it. Trusting myself was the hardest recipe I ever learned. Around the table sit people I didn't know a year ago, women from the center, Nora's friends, neighbors who became family. Different stories, same strength. We share more than food. We share the quiet understanding of those who have rebuilt themselves. Each of us carries a faint crack, but together we shine in the light that slips through it. After dinner, the room softens, plates cleared, candles flickering low. I pour tea chamomile, the same I once served Thomas and Claire, but this time it tastes different. Peace changes the flavor of everything. Nora hands me an envelope. "It came this morning," she says quietly. I recognize the handwriting before she finishes. Thomas. The name alone still carries weight, but not the kind that bends my shoulders anymore. The letter is brief. Apology tangled with shame, pride wrestling with regret. He says he's sorry for not seeing, for mistaking care for control, silence for safety. He hopes I'm happy wherever I am. I read it once, then fold it neatly. No anger, no tears, just understanding. "Will you write him back?" Nora asks. I shake my head. "No need," I say softly. He already knows. Sometimes silence answers best. Sometimes silence remembers for both of us. Would you forgive without being asked? Would you choose peace over pride if you had one last year to live? If you've ever learned that closure can come without words, tell me below, because not every chapter needs a reply. Later, when the dishes are done and everyone has drifted into gentle conversation, I glance at the clock. It sits quietly in the center of the table, its porcelain face glowing under the candlelight. The tiny hands move steady, precise. Tick, tock. Each sound feels like a heartbeat, not of time passing, but of life continuing. I remember the day I found it cracked years ago after that argument. I remember how its silence echoed through the house like grief. Now its ticking is music again. Time never lies. It always tells the truth even when we don't want to hear it. Nora's friend Evelyn leans over and says, "That clock's beautiful. Is it old?" I nod. Older than its wounds. She smiles. Then it's perfect. I smile back, letting the warmth of the moment settle deep. For so long I measured life by what was lost, the years, the people, the trust. Now I see the beauty in what remains. The light still comes through the crack. The sound still fills the room, and I am still here. Only special people, George used to say. It echoes in my mind like a benediction. Maybe he was right. Maybe being special isn't about being untouched by pain. Maybe it's about carrying it gently and still finding the courage to love again. When everyone leaves, I stay a while. The house is quiet now except for the clock. Its ticking follows me as I clear the last cup, soft and steady like a companion. Outside, the night air smells of rain and lilacs. I open the window and breathe in. The world feels wide again, not lonely, just vast. I sit by the table and watch the clock's reflection in the glass. The faint crack gleams when the candle flickers, a reminder that even scars can catch the light. Maybe that's what healing truly is, not erasing what broke you, but learning how to hold it without bleeding. Time never lies. It tells you when to leave. It tells you when to stay. And if you're patient enough, it tells you when you finally come home. The air is soft, almost sacred. The clock ticked softly, not counting down but carrying on.